Wednesday was quite a day for podcasters. We had recorded all sorts of wonderful stuff, which we had to junk because it all got very quickly out of date. The issue was this, an announcement on Truth Social from Donald Trump that dropped most of the high tariffs around the world down to 10%, except for China. They had 125%, and here is how he explained what he was doing.
Well, I thought that people were jumping a little bit out of line. They were getting yippy, you know. They were getting a little bit yippy, a little bit afraid, unlike these champions, because we have a big job to do. No other president would have done what I did. No other president. I know the presidents. They wouldn't have done it. And it had to be done. What was happening to us on trade, not only with, you know, if you look at it, not only with China, but China was by far the biggest abuser in history, and others also, but somebody had to do it. They had to stop because it was not sustainable.
So tariffs apparently paused for now. Has Donald Trump rode back from the brink? Welcome to Americast.
Americast from BBC News.
Hello, it's Anthony in Arlington, Virginia.
And it's Justin at home in South London.
And it is Mariana, aka Misinformation, in the worldwide headquarters.
Okay, it is 1 o'clock in the afternoon in London on the 10th of April. And I say all of that because who knows where we will be by 2 o'clock in the afternoon or wherever. And we've had to junk everything we've already done. So we're meeting, aren't we, in temporary studios around the world. But that doesn't matter because there is so much to talk about that is itself temporary. You never quite know with Donald Trump how long anything is going to last. So I think it's kind of fitting, isn't it, actually, that we're all in temporary places. And also, Mariana, that all of this is happening because of social media posts.
It is. In order to figure out what is or isn't going on inside Donald Trump's head, the million-dollar question, it seems like Truth Social is your best portal. That's Donald Trump's own social media site. And if you look at what happened yesterday, so we're recording on Thursday, so Wednesday of this week, you had Donald Trump saying, be cool, everything's going to work out well. The be cool was in capitals, just so you got the message. The USA will be bigger and better than ever before. And then 4 hours later, the be cool message had slightly evolved. And he essentially said, based on the lack of respect that China has shown to the world's markets, I'm raising the tariff charged to China by the United States of America to 125%, effective immediately. And he then issued what he called this sort of 90-day pause on the other tariffs that he'd imposed and brought them all to this 10% level. So what do we make of that?
Well, remember just a couple of days ago, there were those reports about a 90-day pause. The stock market surged and the White House came out and said, no, we're not even considering that. That's ridiculous. It's fake news. And here we go. 2 days later, we have that 90-day pause and the stock market rebounded quite dramatically just within minutes of Donald Trump's Truth Social announcement. I think ultimately some of the major indices here in the United States were up about 8 or 9%, made up about half of the losses that we've had this entire week. So at least investors seem to think Donald Trump is backing away from this kind of global restructuring of trade policy, even as he is leaning into China and a fight with China and trying to make China the villain here.
And as ever, he had his own explanation for what he had done. Let's listen to that.
And I think it probably came together early this morning, fairly early this morning. Just wrote it up. We didn't have the use of, we didn't have access to lawyers, or we just wrote it up from our hearts, right? It was written from the heart, and I think it was well written too. But it was written from the heart. It was written as something that I think was very positive for the world and for us. And we don't want to hurt countries that don't need to be hurt, and they all want to negotiate. The only problem is, you can only do so many at one time. It's like. We want to do it right. We want to get it right. We want to take care of them, but we have to take care of our country. So, but this was something certainly we've been talking about for a period of time, and we decided to pull the trigger, and we did it today, and we're happy about it.
And Anthony, on the domestic politics, it's really important, isn't it, that China, never mind the kind of effect on geopolitics, but on domestic politics, he's singling out China. And that is something in domestic American political terms you can do, because the argument about whether China is an abuser of trade practices has sort of been won, hasn't it? The Democrats would sort of fold in with that. And I think most Americans would believe, even people who don't follow these things very much, would sort of have an understanding of what they think is malpractice from China that deserves to be punished.
Right. They view China as a major international rival, not just economically, but also militarily, politically. It fits much more neatly into kind of the broad strokes of American foreign policy over the past 10 years or so. So it fits with what Joe Biden was trying to do. He left tariffs that Donald Trump put in his first term on China. He worked more to organize U.S. allies in the Pacific region to position themselves to resist Chinese expansion. So all of this makes sense in kind of a cohesive American strategy in a way that those massive tariffs on the EU and on South Korea and on Japan and on all of these other countries that the United States is supposed to be working closely with just never did. I mean, it's funny, he talks about, he didn't consult with lawyers, he wrote it from the heart. I mean, I think that's pretty obvious because, there was so much confusion after this announcement came in. There was, you had Steve Bessent, or Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, standing there at a press gaggle saying that these tariffs applied to Canada and Mexico. It actually would have raised tariffs on Canada and Mexico. Then they had to come back and say, no, actually they don't. The old tariffs apply there. They had to clarify whether the specific industry targeted tariffs were affected by this. They weren't. What level of tariffs there were coming out. It was chaos. And you could see it in our BBC chats trying to figure all of this out as the story unfolded. And you could see it in the coverage from reporters and the questions from reporters at the White House.
I was going to say that I am appreciating that phrase, "it came from the heart," which seems to be a kind of pretty spot-on way of describing almost every post on social media, but particularly Donald Trump's sort of capitalized / semi-capitalized posts on Truth Social. And there's something about, I don't know, I think it's quite interesting, the kind of emotional slant that Donald Trump has put on that, like the kind of this idea of like, we felt like doing it, like we sort of decided, and we don't want these other countries to be like in trouble or harmed, and we've decided, we felt like it was the time to do this. I mean, like, does a U-turn exist in the world of Donald Trump? And if it does, is this what it looks like?
Isn't that interesting? A U-turn doesn't exist. He's the kind of postmodern rightist. You think of all those people on the left in American politics who claim their own experience and their own kind of vision of who they are and all the other things that people kind of on the postmodern left claim. He's the equivalent on the right, isn't he? There is no such thing as objective truth. There is only his truth, just as some people on the left say there is only their truth about their experience and all the rest of it. And I think you raise a really fascinating point, kind of central political point about Trump, which is that he does, because of who he is and because of the way he is, he manages to get away with so much more than any kind of ordinary person would do. And we ought to hear what the Democrats were saying. I don't know what we all thought of this, but Chuck Schumer, who's still there, still plugging away, poor guy, sounding, I thought, a bit knackered, actually, the Democrats' leader in the Senate, doing his best to sort of whip us all into a frenzy of outrage at what Donald Trump had done.
This is chaos. This is government by chaos. He keeps changing things from day to day. His advisors are fighting among themselves, calling each other names. And you cannot run a country with such chaos, with such unpredictability, with such lack of understanding of what's going on in the world and the facts. When there's chaos, already damage is done, irretrievable damage is done.
So I think Schumer was picking up there on the chaos that happened after this announcement and the confusion as well, and trying to paint that as a broader picture of the Trump administration, not just with these tariffs, but with everything that they're doing, that they don't know what they're doing contradictory things, and they're doing it in a way that is not considering the harms that they're creating, whether whether the American public is going to just breathe a sigh of relief now, or they're going to remember this and think, oh my gosh, he erased our retirement savings in a matter of a week, and they're only partially back. I think that is what the Democrats are going to have to try to capitalize on, and I'm not sure they'll be able to do it yet.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting, Mariana. I don't know if you picked this up, that some of the opposition, I think in a way the more telling opposition to Donald Trump and the more worrying criticism of him for him, didn't come from the Democrats. It came from these broadcasters, these people we've talked about in the past. There are loads of them. You know them better than I do. But these podcasters, often not very political, but quite supportive of Trump during the election. I saw one of them saying, "Man, why am I broke?" halfway through his podcast. He looked at his 401k, his pension thing, which lots of Americans, of course, have on their phones. Anthony keeps glancing nervously away from the camera. I think to look at his. You got that kind of sense that actually in the Trumposphere, or the wider Trumposphere, Mariana, there was also quite a lot of nervousness that probably counted for a bit more than poor old Chuck Schumer.
Yeah, and you think about not just the broadcasters, as you call them, the kind of like these podcasters, alternative media outlets that were pretty instrumental really to Trump's election and reaching sort of the average person who's maybe not so used to consuming what we'd call the professional or the mainstream media these days. But then you've also got what we call the tech bros, the broligarchy, whatever you want to term them. People like Elon Musk, who made quite clear that they weren't necessarily very supportive of what was going on with the tariffs either. And so you've got this section of support that Donald Trump has succeeded in kind of bringing into his base, suddenly saying, oh, actually, not so sure about this, particularly, very wealthy, whether it's social media bosses or tech bosses more broadly, or other very rich people saying, hang on a second, I'm not sure that this is actually a very good thing. And you wonder to what extent that exerted pressure on him, or whether this was always the plan. I think that's sort of the fundamental question, isn't it?
Well, and will we discover, Anthony, by seeing who stays in the White House now? I mean, has it come down to that? Because there was this huge argument, wasn't it? A very public argument between Elon Musk and Peter Navarro, the trade representative, no, the trade advisor, as he is, I think his proper title is. So, and Navarro, I mean, it seems to me has just completely lost. He wanted these tariffs to remain, all the high ones, and they haven't. And Scott Bessent, as you were reminding us earlier on, the Treasury Secretary, seeming pretty relieved by where they'd got to and suggesting that he wanted to be there all along. Does this mean that the bros, the powerful people, the very wealthy people, the backers of Donald Trump, both inside and outside the White House, the hedge fund managers, the West Coast tech people, have they won?
They certainly have won a temporary victory. We may be doing this all again in 90 days when this pause ends up
maybe doing it again in 90
expiring.
minutes, Anthony.
But Donald Trump, in his comments at the White House yesterday, talked about the nervousness that people were getting, the yippies, and starting to get anxious. And I think he may have been starting to get anxious because I think one of the things, it wasn't the stock market tumbling, it wasn't the tech bros complaining. It was, as we talked about in the past, the bond market that was seriously dropping. The yields on U.S. Treasuries were going up dramatically. And that is a real pressure point for governments. And that's a real pressure point for the American government because it makes the cost of borrowing, the cost of issuing new Treasury notes much more expensive. So financing the massive debt that the United States has already becomes much, much more expensive. And if that goes sideways, the United States could be in very, very real trouble in a way that a stock market dip or complaints from within the Republican Party or complaints from Mark Zuckerberg about how he might be overregulated by the EU just do not land the same way.
And then this feeds into this wider debate, doesn't it, Anthony? Because while all of this was happening, I mean, so many other things are going on at the same time, but we ought to mention that they tried to pass a budget, didn't they? They tried to get this thing through Congress that Trump supports, where all the Republicans agree, because of course he's got a majority in both houses of Congress, all Republicans agree, we're going to spend X amount of money, this is how we're going to fund the tax cuts at the end of the year, et cetera, or the continuing tax cuts. And it didn't get through because there are some Republicans who are worried, genuinely worried, aren't there, about spending, not just sort of rhetorically, oh, we ought to spend less, but they actually think that those things you've just mentioned potentially could end in a real existential crisis for the United States.
Yeah, there are Republicans who are worried about runaway, in their view, federal spending, and the margins in the House of Representatives are so narrow. It only takes a handful of those Republicans to scuttle plans to pass any kind of a vote. And that's what happened last night. They didn't even bring this budget resolution to the vote because Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, realized that it was going to go down in flames. You originally had the House of Representatives pass a much more aggressive tax cutting, spending cutting proposal, plan, outline, whatever you want to call it, that would be a framework for later negotiations and debates later this year. The Senate took their turn. They passed a different version, sent it back to the House, and now the House, these hardliners in the House are balking at approving the Senate, the more moderate, more restrained as far as spending cutting goes, Senate plan. And that's where we are today. And I will say there was something else they tried to tuck into that budget resolution, which was that would prevent a vote challenging Donald Trump's trade authority, that would prevent the House of Representatives from voting on revoking the emergency declaration that Donald Trump has used to justify all of these tariffs. So that didn't get through either, at least at the moment. But you can see there's the leadership in the House of Representatives is trying to avoid an unpleasant vote to undermine Donald Trump on his trade policy.
One of the things that has been really, really popping up on the Undercover Voters social media feeds, my fictional characters with all their social media profiles across the main sites, and certainly the ones who don't like Donald Trump so much, is this kind of accusation of potential market manipulation, that Donald Trump did this on purpose in order to benefit himself or benefit his rich friends or invest in certain stocks and shares and then make loads of money out of it. And it certainly sort of has given a bit of sort of, I don't know, a little bit of momentum really to that narrative that, look, Donald Trump is out for himself and out for the rich people and not out for you type thing. It's definitely tended to be more so in the anti-Trump circles on social media, whereas the pro-Trump ones are kind of saying, oh, look at this. This is actually maybe a really wise strategy. And, you know, this is how Donald Trump is really clever at business and the art of the deal and all that kind of stuff that he's sort of known for. And it's something that I imagine has been popping up on Americaster's own social media feeds, because it's something we've had quite a few questions about. This is a voice note we've had from Fiona in Derby.
Hi Americasters, Fiona from Derby here. My question is, as President of the United States, Trump is in a unique position to make decisions which can and have had a significant effect on the global economy. Is there any suggestion that President Trump has or could manipulate the markets for his own personal gain? For example, by short-selling stock and then deliberately causing the stock market to nosedive? And would this fall foul of the US Constitution's anti-corruption provisions or be otherwise illegal? Thank you.
What do we reckon?
Well, there are laws against insider trading. They would be enforced by the Securities and Exchange Commission, which is run by Donald Trump and his administration, his appointees. Obviously, there was a lot of speculation around this because those were huge swings in the stock market, 8-9% swings in the stock market. And if you had any kind of advanced knowledge that something that Donald Trump said or did was going to change that, you could profit greatly from that. And Donald Trump actually at 9:30 yesterday morning posted on Truth Social that now would be a good time to buy. And then just a few hours later, as we discussed, he issued that statement that dramatically moved the stock market in a positive direction. So it would have been a good time to buy, which feeds fuel to these concerns as well. There are some people who have looked at some of the trading that went on right before Donald Trump's announcement, said there were some people who were predicting and positioning themselves to benefit from a stock market surge. Now, there have been no evidence that it's anyone connected to Donald Trump. It's no evidence that Donald Trump or his associates were involved in any kind of insider trading. But, I mean, when you see these big kind of movements, there's going to be that kind of speculation.
Yeah, and Americasters are pretty concerned right across the world. So not only from Fiona in Derby, Marina in South London, Darren in Melbourne, Australia, Ian in Cumbernauld, Scotland, Matthew in Massachusetts, Simon in Beckenham. I mean, the thing is, what people think when they look at Donald Trump and the way that he behaves more widely, and you look at the crypto stuff that he's been involved in, is that this is not a president who adheres to the same standards as previous presidents, and that is a reasonable thing think. And it's something as well, isn't it, Anthony, that the Democrats are openly saying, or at least some of them. Let's listen to Adam Schiff speaking on a video he uploaded just recently.
So today, Trump removed many of the tariffs he had imposed in this on again, off again, it must be Wednesday, tariffs are off again kind of policy. This has just wreaked havoc on the markets, of course, but there is another profound danger as well, and that is insider trading within the White House, within the administration. You may have seen early in the day Trump tweet this. Now, this is a good time to buy. So the question is, between that tweet and Donald Trump's announcement that he was reducing the tariffs on most other nations apart from China, the question is, who knew what the president was going to do? And did people around the president trade stock knowing the incredible gyration the market was about to go through? Because look, this is a president who is trading in his own meme coin, even as he's president. His kids are trading in their own cryptocurrency. You've got people like Elon Musk who are doing their own conflicted self-dealing in the administration. In any administration this corrupt, it is more than necessary to ask, were people personally profiting from insider information while people's savings, their retirement accounts, were being torched? So we're writing to the White House to demand answers. Now, I am fully cognizant of the fact that the White House is probably the last place to be forthcoming about this or any other corruption in the administration. We in Congress need to do more than demand answers. We need to do the oversight necessary to get those answers.
I have to say, Anthony, I listen to that and I think, yes, to a kind of cool, calm, old-style political operative in the United States, they might say, I'm outraged. I just think to Trump supporters, they see him as a rich guy who has a lot of fun. And, you know, again and again, when he's been called out on these things, and my goodness, he has been called out through the ages, indeed, long before he was president as well. And there's all that baggage around him. I just can't see for the Democrats that this really works. Is that right?
I mean, I guess the question is, are people who look at this and see, okay, well, these movements, clearly there's room for someone to profit in it if they knew ahead of time. It's not just harmless, though. It's affecting my retirement savings. It's affecting the price of the consumer goods that I buy. If they start to feel that pain and they feel like someone else is profiting from that pain, I mean, that gets at the heart of Donald Trump's message, right? I mean, that the elites are out to get you and they're getting a better deal than you are. So if that belief sets in and people do start hurting economically because of things that Donald Trump is directly doing, then I think there's a great risk for Donald Trump that it could come back to bite him. Or, I mean, Donald Trump doesn't have to stand for election anymore. It would come back and bite the Republican Party in the elections this November here in Virginia and elsewhere, and then the midterm congressional elections next year. So there is, I think there's very real risk for him.
It's interesting because it's some of that messaging and videos from the Democrats that's popped up on the anti-Trump supporters' social media profiles that I've been analysing. But to this point about it kind of reaching perhaps the sort of on the fence, undecided, could change their mind about Trump voter, I haven't seen it cutting through in quite the same way that all the stuff was around, oh my gosh, look, everything's losing value. And I think to your point, Anthony, it's kind of that. It's like when people feel the real impact of it, or if they feel the real impact of it themselves, that's when the people who aren't kind of in the filter bubble that is, for example, very much leaning Democrat, will start to think, oh, I'm not so sure about this. The other thing that's kind of interesting, isn't it, is the gap or the kind of incompatibility of the messaging that Donald Trump is both unleashing chaos and therefore suggesting a level of it's out of control, he doesn't know what he's doing, but then also suggesting that he's deliberately manipulating the market and therefore he does know what he's doing. I don't know, those two messages feel like they don't necessarily go together.
The thing is, people like the energy. People who support him like the energy, and they contrast it with Joe Biden. And obviously it is a huge contrast, there's no question about that. And if they think that it's all going, broadly speaking, in the right direction, I reckon they'll stick with him. But it's interesting to look at the most recent polls, isn't it, Anthony? The on the economy, the great margin that he had over Joe Biden, the huge kind of difference between them, the enormous feeling that the Trump economy was going to be a great economy, that's kind of gone, hasn't it? There are still all sorts of poll things that worry the Democrats, including their extraordinary unpopularity, 60% unpopularity rate. But But for Trump himself, if you're looking for warning signs, they are there.
Yeah, his approval rating has dipped. And as you mentioned, his handling of the economy, which used to be his strength, has turned negative here as well. And these were polls taken over the past week, but before or not fully encapsulating the fallout from his trade decisions. But when they do ask about his trade policy, that is polling right now in the 30% approval rating margin, that area, which is not good at all. So, that might be another factor in Donald Trump's decision to back away from this a little bit. It was wildly unpopular, although the Trump administration will circulate internal polls that they have of working class Americans that show that the trade policy is being widely viewed as a positive thing, and that they support him. And working class voters are what Donald Trump says this is all about. So they may believe they still have ground to stand on here.
But that then goes to the kind of incoherence of the whole thing, doesn't it? That either you have these tariffs and you reshore all these industries and you start kind of, I don't know, making shoes and all the other stuff, and indeed cars, and not offshoring any of that, or you don't. I mean, either these tariffs do the job that at least was claimed they were going to do, or maybe they don't do that job, and then America is still, as they would see it, stuck in a place, albeit most economists would say it's a rather good place because you're doing high margin, high value manufacturing. What's not to like about that? But they don't like that, and they have some coherent reasons why they don't like that. It seems to me that, I mean, either you do it or you don't do it, and at some stage someone among their supporters is going to say, what's going on? And
going back and forth and changing it left and right, I mean, that does not provide the kind of predictability, the kind of stability necessary for companies to decide, okay, their tariffs are going to be there. I'm going to ramp up production. I'm going to build factories here in the United States because I know that I'm going to have an advantage compared to foreign importers because of these tariffs. We have a saying in Texas about if you don't like the weather, just wait 5 minutes. You could say the same thing about Donald Trump's trade policy right now. It's changing seemingly on a dime every few minutes.
Okay, so we have been asking about our youngest and oldest Americasters because we've had some really nice messages in about people who are quite little listening to Americast and deciding what makes you an Americaster and when. And we thought we might not be able to beat 4 weeks old, which one 4 week old has been listening to us somehow. But we got this from Lida in Prague, who says, I just finished listening to the latest episode with my 5-day-old son. He shamelessly fell asleep right after you stopped talking about penguins.
Penguins.
And he has experienced a whole lot of changes to tariffs in his lifetime, hasn't he?
Yeah, I was going to say, exactly. That's the thing, isn't it? For children who get bored easily with stuff, and particularly the young ones who need to keep, shiny things in front of them and lots of kind of oohs and ahs and all that. We provide it. We provide it better
I don't
than
think it's
any.
us providing it, if we're honest with ourselves.
I think it kind of is, actually, in a way. We provide the entertainment around the main guy, and they're going to wait. I mean, it's an experiment on a whole generation of youth, isn't it? This is politics to them. This is how people normally behave, to make a semi-serious point. My goodness, well, what a generation they'll be.
I hope his first word is not tariffs, though. That would be a bit of a disappointment, wouldn't it?
And clearly we need to have more penguin content, so I think we're going to have to try to do that. But, whenever we mention Elon Musk, we also have to mention penguins somehow.
Penguin klaxon.
That's it. To all of you, however old you are, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, y'all.
That's all we've got time for today. You can find all of our episodes on BBC Sounds. Bye-bye.